Welcome to English Meow. Do you want to speak English? Do you want to understand people when they speak English? Do you want to feel good when you talk to someone in English? In this video, I'll tell you my struggle to learn English. It is simple. It is possible. And it is fun. Stay with me. Let us start. My first problem was understanding spoken English. In the beginning, I could read English words, but I couldn't understand anything when people spoke. They would talk so quickly, and the words sounded different from what I had learned in books. It felt like I was listening to a completely different language. I didn't know how to improve my listening skills. I tried listening to simple audio clips, but they were still hard to understand. At that point, I felt like giving up. It seemed impossible to catch up with people who spoke so quickly, but I didn't stop. I knew that if I wanted to improve, I had to keep trying. I decided to practice listening every day, even if it was just for 10 minutes. I listened to English podcasts, watched movies, and tried to follow along with the speakers. It wasn't easy at first. I couldn't understand every word, and it was difficult to keep up with the speed. But slowly, I started to understand more. Over time, I realized that listening to real conversations was helping me more than just listening to simple recordings. Hearing people talk in everyday situations made me understand how words and phrases are used in real life. Even though my listening improved, I still struggled with speaking. Speaking in English was much harder for me than reading or listening. I often hesitated when I needed to say something, and I was afraid of making mistakes. I thought that if I didn't speak perfectly, people would judge me. This fear of making mistakes stopped me from speaking as much as I should have. I would avoid talking in English whenever possible. One day, I realized that the only way to get better at speaking was to practice. I started with simple sentences, saying things like, "I like coffee," or "I'm going to the store." At first, I felt embarrassed, but I kept speaking anyway. Every time I spoke, I felt a little bit better. Slowly, my fear of making mistakes faded. I started to speak more confidently. I also found that speaking with others helped me improve faster. I tried to talk to people in English whenever I could, even if they didn't speak perfectly. As I continued to practice speaking, I noticed that my vocabulary was a big challenge. I often struggled to find the right words when I spoke. I had learned many words in class, but when I tried to use them in real conversations, I would forget them. It felt frustrating because I knew the words in my head, but they wouldn't come out when I needed them. I started to feel that I wasn't making any progress. I began to worry that I would never be able to speak fluently because my vocabulary wasn't big enough. to solve this problem, I decided to learn words in context rather than memorizing them in lists. Instead of trying to remember words alone, I started reading books, articles, and watching videos in English. I paid attention to how words were used in different situations. For example, when I read a story, I would notice how the author used words to describe feelings or actions. I started writing down new words and phrases that I didn't know. Later, I would try to use them in sentences. Slowly, my vocabulary grew, and I began to feel more confident when I spoke. Another important thing I learned was the power of repetition. I realized that it wasn't enough to learn new words once. I had to keep practicing them regularly. I started reviewing words I had learned every week. I would write them again, say them out loud, and use them in different sentences. By repeating the words, I helped my brain remember them. Repetition became a key part of my learning process, and it made a big difference in how quickly I was able to speak with more variety and confidence. However, one of the biggest struggles I faced was understanding grammar. English grammar seemed very confusing, especially when it came to tenses and sentence structure. I would read rules, but they didn't always make sense. Sometimes I would make mistakes and not know why. I remember feeling very lost when I tried to write essays or explain my ideas clearly. The more I tried to study grammar, the more I felt like I was going in circles. Eventually, I realized that focusing too much on grammar rules wasn't the answer. Instead of worrying about making every sentence perfect, I decided to focus on speaking more and practicing grammar through use. I started writing shorter texts and speaking about simple topics. I would review basic grammar rules and try to apply them when I spoke or wrote. Slowly, my grammar started improving, but it wasn't something I could fix all at once. I understood that learning grammar was a gradual process, and that made me feel better about my progress. As time went on, I began to realize that my attitude towards mistakes was a big part of my struggle. In the beginning, I was very afraid of making errors. I thought that every mistake meant I wasn't improving. This fear held me back from speaking, writing, and even listening in English. But as I spent more time learning, I started to understand that mistakes are a normal part of the learning process. Everyone makes them, and they are actually helpful. When I allowed myself to make mistakes, I started improving more quickly. I would speak and write without worrying too much about being perfect. If I made a mistake, I would learn from it and keep going. I began to see mistakes as an opportunity to learn rather than something to be afraid of. This shift in my mindset helped me become more confident. and I started using English more frequently. One of the biggest changes I made was to stop comparing myself to others. In the beginning, I would see people who spoke English well and feel discouraged. I would think, I'll never be as good as them. This negative thinking only made me feel worse. But eventually, I realized that everyone learns at their own pace. Just because someone else is ahead of me doesn't mean I'm failing. We all have different learning experiences and challenges. Comparing myself to others only made me feel frustrated and defeated. Instead of comparing myself to others, I started to focus on my own progress. I set small, achievable goals for myself. For example, I would aim to have a conversation in English for 5 minutes or learn 10 new words every week. When I reached these goals, I felt proud of myself, and this motivated me to keep going. I also celebrated the small successes, like understanding a new movie scene in English or speaking a sentence without hesitation. These small achievements added up over time, and they helped me stay motivated. One of the key things that helped me stay motivated was the fact that I could see my improvement. At first, I couldn't understand much of what I was listening to, and I struggled to form simple sentences. But as I continued to practice, I started to notice that I could understand more and I could speak more easily. My vocabulary grew, and I felt more comfortable speaking with others. It was a slow process, but seeing these improvements, no matter how small, kept me motivated to keep learning. As I continued my journey to learn English, I found that consistency was key. At times, it felt like I wasn't making much progress, especially when I compared myself to others who seemed to learn faster. However, I began to understand that learning a language is not about quick results, but about steady progress. I learned that the more consistent I was, the more I could improve. One way I stayed consistent was by setting a daily study routine. I didn't spend hours studying every day, but I made sure to practice every day, even if it was only for a short time. I would listen to a podcast while walking, read an English article during lunch, or write a short diary entry in English before bed. These small practices added up, and over time, I started noticing changes. My English became smoother, and I was able to express myself more clearly. Another thing I discovered was the importance of having fun with learning. In the beginning, I would study English only because I had to. I would get frustrated when I couldn't understand something or when I made a mistake. But I soon realized that learning didn't have to be all about studying hard. If I found ways to enjoy learning English, I was more likely to stick with it. I started watching movies and TV shows in English for fun, and it helped me learn without feeling like I was studying. I chose shows with simple language and subtitles so I could follow along easily. I also began listening to music in English and trying to understand the lyrics. Sometimes I would repeat the lyrics or sing along, and it helped me improve my pronunciation. Speaking with others also became more enjoyable. At first, I was nervous and shy to talk in English, but as I practiced more, I became more comfortable. I found that talking with friends who were also learning English was fun and motivating. We would make mistakes together, laugh at our errors, and help each other learn. Speaking with others made me feel less alone in my struggle and reminded me that language learning is a shared experience. In addition to these enjoyable practices, I learned to use mistakes as a learning tool. When I made a mistake, I didn't beat myself up about it. Instead, I focused on understanding why I made the mistake and how I could correct it next time. This positive approach helped me keep moving forward even when I faced challenges. Through all of this, I realized that learning English is not just about memorizing vocabulary or understanding grammar rules. It's about using the language in real situations and practicing it regularly. The more I used English in my daily life, the more natural it felt. I no longer feared making mistakes. Instead, I saw them as steps toward improvement. As my English skills continued to improve, I started to feel more comfortable in conversations. At first, speaking was something I avoided, but now I found myself enjoying it. I became more confident in using English, even though I still made mistakes. One of the things that helped me become more confident was realizing that no one speaks perfectly all the time, not even native speakers. This understanding allowed me to relax and focus on communication instead of worrying about errors. One of the biggest changes I made in my approach was to stop translating everything from my native language into English. In the beginning, I would think in my language and then try to find the English words for it. This often made me slow and unsure. Over time, I started to think in English, which made speaking and understanding much easier. I would see something in front of me and immediately think the English word for it. This small shift in thinking made a huge difference in how quickly I could speak and understand. I also started reading more challenging materials in English. At first, I stuck to simple books and articles because I was afraid of not understanding. But as I got more comfortable with the language, I began to challenge myself with books that were a bit harder. I found that even though I didn't understand every word, I could still follow the main ideas of the story or article. This gave me more confidence to read and exposed me to new vocabulary. The more I read, the more I understood, and the more I could speak about different topics. Listening to English also became a daily habit. I started listening to podcasts, watching English YouTube channels, and even listening to audiobooks while walking or exercising. At first, I didn't understand much, but as I continued, I could pick out more words and understand the meaning of the sentences. Listening every day helped me get used to the rhythm of the language, and it improved my speaking too. I could hear how words were pronounced and used in different situations, which made it easier for me to use them in my own speech. One of the challenges I still faced was understanding different accents. English is spoken in many different countries, and each place has its own accent. Sometimes it was hard for me to understand people from other countries, even though they were speaking English. However, I realized that the more I exposed myself to different accents, the easier it became. I started listening to speakers from various regions and made an effort to understand how their accents affected the way they spoke. This helped me become more adaptable and able to understand English speakers from all over the world. Through all of these experiences, I learned that learning English is a long-term process, and that improvement comes gradually. There were days when I felt frustrated, but I kept reminding myself that every mistake was a lesson, and every bit of practice was moving me closer to my goal. As I look back on my journey to learn English, I realize how much I have changed. When I first started, I felt hopeless at times. I wasn't confident in my speaking, and I didn't understand much of what was going on around me. But over the years, I've made steady progress. I've learned to be patient with myself and to enjoy the process of learning rather than just focusing on the end result. The key to my success has been consistency. Whether it was listening to English every day, speaking with others, or reading a book in English, I made sure to do something in English every day. This constant exposure to the language has helped me grow, even when I didn't notice it. Small practices, like reading a paragraph or listening to a song in English, may seem insignificant at the time, but they all add up. Another important lesson I learned is that learning English isn't just about knowing the rules or memorizing words. It's about using the language in real situations and applying it to my life. For example, when I practiced speaking, I didn't just focus on grammar or pronunciation. I learned to think in English and express my thoughts more naturally. Over time, speaking became less about trying to be perfect and more about connecting with others. I also realized that there is no one-size-fits-all method for learning English. Everyone learns differently, and what works for one person might not work for another. The most important thing is to find what works for you and stick with it. For me, combining listening, speaking, Reading and writing every day helped me make steady progress. But for others, focusing on speaking or watching movies might be more effective. The key is to keep experimenting and trying new methods until you find what feels right for you. Learning English is not something that happens overnight. It requires time, effort, and patience. There were many times when I wanted to give up, but I pushed through because I knew the effort would pay off. Now, I feel much more confident in my ability to communicate in English, and I can have conversations without fear. Looking back, I am proud of how far I've come. I remember the days when I couldn't understand anything. And now I can follow complex conversations, understand movies without subtitles, and speak with people from different countries. I'm still learning, of course, but I've come a long way. In the end, learning English is about perseverance and the willingness to keep going even when it's tough. Every mistake is an opportunity to grow, and every day of practice brings you closer to fluency. It's not an easy journey, but it is worth it. With patience, dedication, and the right mindset, anyone can learn English and improve over time.